Welcome to Soul Night Live number 77. Today our guest is Kevin Godley.
Hello.
Kevin, this is Sean from the Musical Talk Show. Good evening. How are you?
Hello there. I'm fine. How are you? I'm sorry I had to switch to phone, but I was having a few problems with Zoom.
That's not a problem. Ultimately it's about the words anyway. Otherwise, we're just a bunch of talking heads. So I'm totally fine with that.
Which is exactly who I've been talking to for the last year, a bunch of talking heads. I don't know if anyone's real anymore, frankly.
Oh, I can assure you I definitely am.
Okay. So how are you doing over there?
Today isn't bad. This year's feels like it's on the upswing compared to last year. So, I'm hopeful.
Good.
Yeah, seems like the vaccine is getting in a lot of arms, so maybe by summer we can have some music again in person.
That would be nice.
Yeah, I would love that.
That would be nice. Yeah, that would be nice.
I want to play some and I want to see some, so fingers crossed.
Yes, fingers and all internal organs crossed.
That's right.
Something's got to change, that's for sure.
No doubt. So I've been enjoying the new record, and I had some questions about it. And
Okay.
I wanted to ask a few other things too, leading up to it. I was curious. This was your first solo album, solo in the true sense. Did you ever have the urge to do one before? And why now? I guess.
I never had the confidence to do one before. I mean, the thought had occurred to me, but I just kind of never got around to testing the water, as it were. It was, I don't know, the time must have been right, I suppose, for this. There was never a time where it felt like a really critical thing to do, because I've been busy doing so many other things. But for some reason, the circumstances that led up to the making of this one just seemed to fit and make perfect sense at the time. So, like most things I'm involved with, I just kind of followed it to the logical conclusion in the hope that it would turn into something worthwhile. It wasn't something that I'd been planning for a long time. It was just something happened virtually by accident in 2016 that led me here.
Oh, really?
Which I'm sure. Well, not accident probably isn't the right word. Yeah, a couple of people I didn't know, completely independent of each other, sent me 2 pieces of instrumental music, asking if I'd be interested in turning them into songs. And I thought it sounded like an interesting thing to try, which I did. And I enjoyed it. It wasn't that different to traditional songwriting. The only difference was I wasn't sat opposite someone who was arguing with me, who I had to make coffee for every 20 minutes. And that sort of natural bounce back and forth had gone, but it wasn't something that I missed. So essentially, it was a rewarding experience, 2 rewarding experiences, and I probably filed that away, thinking, if I ever do make an album, this may be an interesting way to approach it.
Yeah. Okay. So this was a few years back when the whole genesis for this album kind of came down the pike, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, the 2 tracks that I did ended up on the album. The 2 tracks are Expecting a Message and Periscope.
Oh, okay. I was going to ask about a few of the different songs in particular, and Periscope is at the top of my list. So I was wondering if maybe...
Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering. To my ears, that sounded like it might have been the single. I don't know if they even do singles anymore, but...
That's a good question. I think we kind of released everything as a single.
Yeah, just at once.
Well, Periscope was a weird one because that was the second track that I recorded. Expecting a Message was the first.
Mm-hmm.
But Periscope was an odd one because I'm not really a proper musician in terms of being able to play an instrument other than drums. So I was trying to wrestle when I got this track in and understand where the chord sequence began and ended in Periscope.
Mm-hmm.
If you can imagine it without the vocals, it seems to be one chord leading to another, and then to another. Every chord seems pregnant, and then giving birth to another chord. And there doesn't seem to be a logical beginning or end to the sequence, or at least it didn't seem that way to me. So I couldn't write the whole thing. All I could do, I virtually wrote most of the album by recording, as opposed to sitting down, writing it, and then singing it. What I did was, I recorded the first 20 seconds of vocals on Periscope and then stopped, and then listened to the next 20 seconds, and then recorded the next 20 seconds to fit that particular chord sequence, and so on and so forth, in the hope that it would all kind of join together and make some kind of sense, which it actually does.
Oh yeah.
But in the true spirit of the project, I was responding to what I'd been given, but in a very kind of primitive way. But I mean, a good way to indicate that is at the very end. I sing a number of times, I think I'm going to need some help, and there's a pause between I think I'm going to need some and the word help.
Uh-huh.
And the reason I'm doing that is I have no idea what the next chord is. So I have to wait for it to play before I sing the word help.
Oh, okay. Well, it all sounds...
but that kind of indicates how that song was written.
Yeah, well, it doesn't sound like it came together like that. It sounds like it all kind of logically fell into place at one time. So kudos, that's the seams do not show.
Well, that's a good thing. I wasn't aiming for them to show. It was just for that particular song. That was the process that seemed necessary to get from A to Z.
Sure. Can you tell us a little bit about the lyrics?
The lyrics for Periscope, it's essentially, it's about somebody who has retreated from society to a degree. He's become a recluse, and because he possibly has different opinions to his friends now, and he doesn't want to mix with anybody. I mean, maybe I was thinking ahead into the pandemic. I don't know, but I suppose it's about alienation more than anything else, and paranoia. And he's holed himself up in his house. He's built a periscope so he can keep an eye on what's going on outside, but he ain't going anywhere. And he's getting more paranoid every day. He thinks people hate him. He doesn't like what he sees of the world anymore. But he's aware he needs some help, and he's calling out to somebody, but we don't know who. I suppose it's a little reminiscent of John Lennon's help, but nowhere near as good.
Well, I found it a compelling track to listen to, and it kind of speaks to a lot of the mindset that's come along in this past year since the pandemic started. So I think a lot of these forces were in play before that, but it just compounded them, the whole paranoia and all that, and so it's interesting that you were going down this road lyrically before the pandemic even struck. There's a lot of these paranoid types. You ever heard the saying, if you knew how little people spoke about you, or what is that saying? Don't worry what others think of you, because if you knew how little they thought of you in the first place, it wouldn't be a concern. Something to that effect.
That's very good. That's
Yeah.
very good.
Oh,
That
well, something
reminds
like,
me of what somebody said to me. What's the definition of a pessimist?
oh, gosh, someone that just has a bad attitude about everything.
No, the definition of a pessimist is an experienced optimist.
Good way to put it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, you know, on a sort of general thing, I didn't set out to record a particularly depressing album or a dark album or anything, but I think you've hit the nail on the head in that, I don't know, whenever you're writing lyrics, which is never that easy, particularly if you want to say something worth saying, but at the time of putting the album together, everything was changing. So much was kicking off at different levels: politics, culture. And it was pretty depressing. But for a lyricist, it's all wonderful stuff.
Sure.
If there's extraordinary things happening, that is great material for lyrics. Unfortunately, but that's true.
Now, it seems that the theme kind of permeates the other songs on the album as well. Would you agree with that?
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay. Well, tell us a bit about the Song of Hate. You know, for a Song of Hate, I thought it was rather catchy.
All right, is a Frankenstein monster of all the people that I've encountered in my life, who I thought were really great and turned out to be complete arseholes.
I know.
Forgive the expression.
I know the type.
Who I thought were going to be really helpful and help me move forward in a selfless way, in a kind way, but turn out to be pricks.
I've certainly met a few of those, definitely.
I'm sure lots of us have met a few of those, but I'm thanking them because they were all, you know, they're valuable experiences, which is why I'm coming at it from that kind of strange angle.
Yeah.
Thank you for being so cruel. Thank you for being such a miserable son of a bitch. Thank you for taking me down this dark road from where I cannot turn back, etc., etc. Because you learn from these things, and much more interesting than saying just what a bunch of pricks you are.
Right. Yeah. Let's wrap it in a bit of metaphor. You know, let's not just be too obvious about it. Now, let me backtrack a little bit. Now, one of the unique things about this album is that these were instrumental tracks that were sent to you by different people from all over the world.
Yeah.
Am I right? And you started with well over 200 of them. How did you whittle it down, and what were you looking for when it came to choosing them?
Well, I with the original ask, which was on Pledge Music, it was very general, but there were certain terms and conditions. I was asking for anything from between 3 minutes to 7 minutes or something like that. I wasn't looking for anything with a particularly traditional structure. I wasn't looking for any particular genre. I was looking for things that would excite me, essentially, and what that means is something in it that was stimulating to listen to, that would kind of appeal to my instincts. And I had no idea what that meant, but I wanted to keep the brief as open as possible. And that's precisely what I got. I mean, I think I got 286 pieces of music in the end, and lots of different kinds of stuff, from straight ahead rock and roll to punk to R&B to country music to avant-garde classical music to jazz to blues, you name it. They were all in there. But when it actually came to the process of choosing, it was more like they chose me. Because the only way for me to do it was to listen to everything and drag each track into GarageBand that I felt like I may be able to contribute to, and just try singing with it, just try improvising to vocally, and which is pretty much what I did. Some tracks I knew I'd never do anything for that or this or the other. But the tracks that I felt like I had some kind of affinity for, I just tried to work with them. And the ones that I ended up doing, they sort of pushed themselves to the surface for many, many different reasons. Either something came very quickly that I knew was going to work, or something lingered from that particular track that said, come back to me after you've done another 3 tracks. It's a difficult thing to put your finger on.
Sure.
That kind of process.
Well, sometimes it's... No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. So I was feeling my way through them. Like my instincts were my guide dog, if you like. Because I'd never worked with any of these people and hadn't met them. All I had to go on was this little piece of music. So I had to just try stuff. In other words, which is why the album took a long time to complete. Because there were a few occasions where I tried something on one piece of music and it was sort of working, but not quite. But later on, a few weeks later, I might try the same lyric with a different tune on a different piece of music, and it worked far better. But that didn't mean the one I tried it on first was no good. I would try something else on that. So it was keeping a lot of different balls in the air for a considerable amount of time. And don't forget that not everything came in at once. All the tracks came in over quite an extended period of time. So there were occasions where I thought I had something really good, but then a new track would arrive, and that particular idea I was playing with turned out to work better on something new than something that I've been trying to make happen for the last 2 weeks. It was a trial and error from beginning to end. But the ones that I ended up doing, I guess, I don't know if there's any stylistic commonality between them, if that's a word.
Well, I think that...
I don't necessarily think there is.
No.
I mean, certainly not in terms of genre.
No, but I felt like they all hung together as if they belonged as one album. So,
okay.
but a lot of them were rather unconventional. Some of them were a little jarring, but in a good way that I think went well with the lyrics.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
I think it's probably, it never even occurred to me, but I think because I'm doing all the vocals, it's got to sound like one thing to a degree. But I didn't realize that until we started to put a running order together. And then I suddenly realized that it does work as an album. It does work. Which was quite gratifying after all the graft I put in together. I said, but probably the main thing that I got from doing it was that I found my own voice. If you think about everything that I've done musically over the years, it was always 100% consistently been in collaboration with at least one other people, if not two, or if not 2, 3, or 4. There's never really been a creative situation for me in music where I have been in control of what the finished output is. And I know this is a purely collaborative effort. I've worked with 12 other people,
Sure.
in a sense, but this is the first time that I've been in charge of it, and I was stamping my personality on it as opposed to half my personality or a quarter of my personality, and that to me was really liberating.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I would think it would. I'm kind of like that myself. I kind of write when I feel like I have a need for the songs. Some people just write and record every day and file them away, and I just couldn't imagine that. But actually, this year, I've made a New Year's resolution to get down the hall and record a new piece of music every week, without any regard to what's going to happen to it later or not. And it's been a good feeling. It feels a lot like painting. Where you just sit in front of a blank canvas and splash paint on it until you have a picture you like, and pretty much I'm just kind of letting my muse do the driving. And it's been interesting. I mean, one week I write a song that sounds like it was written in Prohibition era New York in the 20s, and the next week I'm at somebody's Greek wedding, and but it's all me, and it feels more honest than some things I've done where I tried to plan ahead what it would be, and so that's been kind of nice to just let it kind of lead me rather than the other way around.
When that happens, that's the best. I mean, that happened to me a number of times on this, where I don't know if you feel the same, but there's always a point in the song, particularly a really good song, where something happens. You either find a phrase or a lyric or a riff or something, and that is the key to everything else.
Absolutely. I mean,
once you found that you can see a little clearer down the tunnel, and you just follow that little light. And if you're lucky, you get there. I mean, I remember when I was listening to the first song I really attacked with any seriousness was it ended up being called All Bones Are White.
Yeah, that's
and I was at the time, that phrase came to mind because I was listening to that piece of music, the instrumental that was sent to me, at the same time as I was watching all the shit go down in Charlottesville.
Sure.
And that phrase, All Bones Are White, came to mind, and that was my key. That was my way in.
Yeah, and now is that a bit of a commentary on racism? Because it seems like, at the end of the day, we all have white bones.
Yeah, exactly. It just seemed to be. It spoke to me somehow, and it was the key. It took me from beginning to end. But I was so appalled by what I was watching on TV. I just had to write something.
I have to admit, as I was watching some of that stuff last year, rubber bullets kept going through my head.
Rubber bullets kept going through your head. I'm surprised you're capable of talking to me then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Literally, yeah. Well, thankfully I wasn't in town. Not that town, anyway. But yeah. All this rubber bullets flying about. Yeah, definitely made me think of that for a moment. Who are some of your vocal inspirations?
So my vocal inspirations, I have no idea. I mean, few people said I sound like Bowie on it, but I think that there was nothing intentional. And there are so many people whose vocal abilities I admire. I mean, anything from Marvin Gaye to Billie Holiday to Tom Waits, and on and on and on. But I prefer vocalists to singers, if that makes any sense.
How do you differentiate between the two?
A singer is someone who's a professional singer. They understand how vocal cords work, how to manipulate the muscles as a professional. A vocalist is someone who just does it naturally and has a style that isn't contrived. At least that's kind of what it means to me. And I'm a vocalist. I'm not a singer. I'm a vocalist. I just happen to be able to get the notes out, and so I don't really think too hard about who I sound like or if I sound like anyone in particular.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and I didn't expect that, But I just wanted to point out how awesome your vocals sound. You sound as good as you did back in the 70s, I think, and a bit richer now.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and I wish I was. Yeah, financially, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, thank you. I mean, a few people have said that, and I think that's probably because I don't smoke. I haven't smoked for, 50 years or something.
Excellent.
45, 50 years. Oh, no, that's not quite true. I stopped smoking in the 90s, so I'll say 30 years perhaps. But I haven't used the voice much. I haven't sung professionally. I haven't been on the road. I haven't strained it. So that's maybe one reason. The other reason is maybe my diet. I'm a vegetarian, so that may be something to do. I honestly don't know, but I'm thankful that it sounds pretty good for someone my advanced years.
Yeah, you sound like you're 30, but a bit richer. And that was one of the things.
That's good. I love singing as well. I enjoy doing it.
Do you have an opportunity to drum very much? Do you have a kit set up where you just play for your own enjoyment sometimes?
I've got a small Roland electronic kit.
Okay.
But I haven't got a full acoustic kit.
And who were your early drum influences or inspirations, I should say?
Well, my first music that I got into was American jazz, and I was a big Art Blakey fan.
Sure.
So he was a big influence. But then I suppose, I don't know, Keith Moon.
I thought you were going to say that.
Yeah, well, I lived in his house.
Really?
We bought his house. Yeah, way back in the 70s.
Is this the one he drove? Was there a car in the pool in the backyard by chance?
No, there wasn't. There was a fiberglass rhinoceros.
Okay.
And there was a hovercraft, but there was no car in the pool.
Okay.
Huge Keith Moon fan. I mean, complete Mr. Thrash, but such venom and excitement and a completely different way of approaching the instrument. Ridiculous way of approaching the instrument. A big fan of Keith.
Oh, absolutely.
But I guess the drummers that I admire more than anything are the drummers that do very little. I was a big fan of the Motown records. The rhythm section on all the Motown records were so minimal, but so they were the engine room. I like the notion of the rhythm section as the engine room and being that reliable. I'm not into flashy fills, or I'm not into cymbals that much. Just tasty playing, simple. Obviously, there are certain people like Steve Gadd and so on and so forth that tip the scales, but my thing is simplicity. Probably because I'm not capable of doing some of the more complex exercises. But I love playing that, sitting down behind a kit and just playing a groove and letting everybody else do the hard work.
Sure. Well, I think at the end of the day, it's all about being wrapped up in a great song and, serving the song rather than being a vehicle for, showing off. Although it depends on the genre.
Actually, another favorite drummer of mine, I have to say, Stuart Copeland is one of my favorites.
Oh, I love him. Yeah, his sound was so fresh. I mean, when I first heard the Police in the late 70s, it's like nobody tunes their snare like that these days. Who is this guy?
Yeah. Yeah, I think, he put bass drum, put kick drum beats in where they should be snare drum beats and things like that. He's an extraordinary player.
Yeah, he really is, and he's still at it all these years later, in one form or another.
That's right.
Yeah, so kudos to Stuart.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a bit about the follow-up. I should mention that the album that we've been talking about, folks, is called Muscle Memory. And where's the best place to get that album at, Kevin?
You can get the album if you go on to 51 State Conspiracy. You can order it straight from this site called Greed Bag, which will take you to my personal shop, if you like, or you can go onto that on my Instagram page. Do the same thing there. I think it's also available on Amazon. I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I know it's available in downloads and streaming, but probably best to get it directly from the label via this thing called Greed Bag if you want to actually buy a compact disc.
Okay.
Greed Bag.
Greed.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to be greedy and have a whole bag of CDs for myself.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good. Okay. Now tell me a bit about the companion album, Linguistic Errors of Judgment. I was listening to a bit of it.
That's not an album yet.
Okay.
It's not an album yet. It's an experiment. Okay. And the reason that came into being was that the subject matter of some of the songs were so interesting to me that I felt I hadn't really said enough in the songs about the subject, and I felt there was a lot more to be said. So I thought, well, why not just say it as opposed to make more music to see if you can do it in an interesting way. So Linguistic Errors of Judgment is essentially, it's a companion piece to the song that's called Cut to the Cat.
Yeah.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
And it's essentially me having an argument with myself around the subject matter of wokeness, culture, political correctness, and where that's going, where it could go. And it's two extremes, one for and one against.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a 16-minute piece.
Yeah, I checked it out on SoundCloud. And
oh, you've listened to it?
Yeah, I did. And I found it amusing and a little chilling all at the same time because of the subject matter and how we seem to be leaning in that direction these days. Almost like the word police are coming to get you.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, it's I don't live in England anymore, but a friend of mine was talking me through what's happening. They're trying to pass a bill where people cannot demonstrate anymore.
Oh, how convenient.
So, things are moving along at a pace that aren't very comfortable for many, many, many different reasons. And I don't know, a lot of people seem to be scared to say anything about anything anymore. So I just figured I should. I mean, that's only one subject, but I'm planning to do another one that's I'm not sure which one I'm going to do next. And it probably won't be one for every single track on the album, but there will probably be at least 6, I would imagine. But we'll have to wait and see how the pilot episode, Linguistic Errors of Judgment, is received to see if the experiment works at any level.
Sure. Well, I think it's a compelling instrument, not instrument, a compelling experiment. So I wish you luck with that. I think you're on the right track.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm planning one called Technology. Because I've noticed, I don't know if you noticed this, Blaine, but I was always under the impression that technology had been designed to make everybody's life easier.
Well, maybe.
I'm increasingly finding it the opposite.
Yeah, it's rather untrue. I think it turned a corner some time back, where it's become more of an intrusion than a convenience in a lot of ways.
Well, it's like it's fine if it works, but if something goes wrong, the hoops you have to jump through to understand what's wrong and to get it fixed are incredible. This is one of the reasons we're speaking on the phone. For some reason, I upgraded my operating system from my Mac 2 or 3 nights ago, and a number of things just haven't worked since. I'm like trying to understand why and talk to the right people and discover the right passwords and do this, that, and the other to make everything work again. Why don't things automatically work anymore? It's like, surely you'd think that technology would at least be able to do that now, but it seems to be getting more and more convoluted.
I agree. And it seems like just some simple things sometimes online are the hardest thing to do. Like if there was just a number to call a human being and say, hey, what am I doing wrong? But sometimes that's the last thing.
You can't do that. There's these things, that
I know, it's like
outlines.
It's like
like a bot.
We could cut to the chase immediately, but instead I have to go through all these hoops, and it's annoying. Absolutely.
It seems like, to give you an example of that, I was staying a few years ago now, honestly, I was staying in a small hotel with a tiny television that was about 2 foot away from me next to the bed. And I was watching something, and someone was in the next room, and the TV was too loud in my room, and I just wanted to turn the volume down. Now, in a real simple world, back in the day, you just lean forward and turn the volume knob down.
Sure.
No. I had to search the room for the remote. And once I found the remote, I had to navigate my way through it to find the volume, which didn't work. And then I had to change the batteries on it to make it work. It took me probably 5 to 10 minutes to lower the volume on my television.
I've been through that.
You know what I mean? It's like, what's the point? So for my money, there should be something called Digilog, which is a combination of analog technology and digital technology. Because sometimes simple is better than complex for the sake of it.
That's true. And I think that's true in most things in life. All these people with these convoluted paranoid theories. It's like, Occam's razor, come on, people.
Yeah.
Just keep it simple. That's probably the answer.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Anyway, that's worth talking about.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about a few other things. Recently, I got in an argument with a friend of mine who I believe probably only heard I'm Not in Love. And he was convinced that you guys were what they call a yacht rock band. Have you heard this term before that us Yanks use for sort of soft rock from the 70s?
I've never heard that, John. What is it? A what band?
Yacht rock. Imagine listening, sipping a
Yacht
pina
rock.
colada on the deck of your yacht. And what kind of music would accompany that? Well,
obviously us.
Well, kind of, I see a line that kind of ties it together, but it's usually people like Michael McDonald and the Doobie Brothers, Steely Dan.
Right.
I'm sure FM lumped you guys kind of in there on the playlist back in the 70s, but to my mind, that's just You know, I never really thought of you in that genre, even though that song seems to get lumped on those playlists quite often. I mean, anyone that's listened to the 10cc catalog knows that, you know, there's 100 songs and they're all different. So you can't really
Yeah,
go, they were this or they were that. So yeah, I was
yeah.
just kind of curious. And then what about the, like, another one I hear is, you know, they're kind of like slightly progressive. And I wouldn't call you progressive rock by any means, but you know, the kind of devil may care attitude is similar in the sense that, you know, we're not looking to follow commercial norms. We're going to do what we want and be artistic about it. So I can kind of see a little connection there, but again, I wouldn't lump you in either one of those genres, honestly.
I think I know what you mean. I mean, I think that part of the problem with the success rate of 10cc, or the lack of it, was we didn't have a specific way of looking at the world or a specific way of thinking about the world. We didn't look particularly interesting. Our stage shows weren't particularly visual. We were kind of, as people, relatively anonymous. But the music was all over the place, so it was difficult. I understand what you're saying, because it was difficult to pin down. People like, generally speaking, I think they like to be able to put they like to be able to put bands in boxes. Like, for instance, if, let's take a contemporary band of ours, let's take Roxy Music, for instance, who were popular at the same time we were. Now, they were very specific in what they were about, and they were much more easy to comprehend, I think, than we were. We were kind of all over the place, and therefore I don't think that served as well.
Well, I don't know.
Commercially speaking,
You know, I mean, I love the variety, you know, so thank you for that. Yeah, you felt Roxy were contemporaries. Was there any other groups back then that you also felt you had some things in common with?
I can't think of anybody we had anything in common with. I can't. Actually, when I think back on us, we didn't make any sense in terms of crafting or branding. There was nothing there you could grasp. And the one thing that we did do, unlike most other bands of that period, we used humour, and I don't think that was very cool at the time to be funny.
Oh, absolutely.
But everything was very kind of, I don't know, everything was kind of pretty strict about what was cool back then, if I remember correctly. Not that things have changed radically, but I think the advent of the internet has kind of opened that up somewhat and destroyed those particularly, I don't know, those ways of looking at things that doesn't exist before. But we were who we were. We couldn't sort of be anybody else. But I think it's partially to do with the fact that we didn't look like anything. Therefore, we didn't lock into anybody's mind in a memorable way. And if you like this particular track, you couldn't hang on to it and be assured that there was going to be anything like it on the next record, because everything we did was different.
Absolutely.
So we were, which musically I think was a strength, but in terms of the commercial world and selling and branding and all that nonsense, we didn't fit the mold because there wasn't one.
Yeah. When you all first started playing live, what were some of the kind of bills that you wound up on? Like,
oh God,
what were some groups you remember opening for?
I remember when we did a tour of America, we were sort of ridiculous. We were supporting like Slade And then another night we'd be supporting sort of Johnny Winter. And another night we'd be supporting completely haphazard, random acts that bore no resemblance to what we were about. And I remember we played a show in Liverpool once where Queen supported us.
Oh, wow. Well, that's
I mean, there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason or any thought.
No, but I like the sound of that bill
Well,
better than some of those others.
It's nuts. I mean, it really is. It seems to be indicative of everything to do with that band's existence. There was no plan. There was nothing made tangible sense that you could lock onto and say this is what that band was about, because we were kind of, I don't know, we were kind of more like journalists than songwriters in a very bizarre way. We kind of report on things in our songs that seemed interesting at the time. So I don't know. We were a puzzle. And puzzles aren't usually that successful. It's the things that fit together that are.
Okay, I can see that. Would you have time to talk about a few songs from your career and what their inspirations were, any memories of them? Okay, I thought I would kind of start with the first 10cc album and kind of go forward. Second song, first side, Sand in My Face. Any memories of that one?
Yeah. Back in the day, there was always sort of English comics that we always used to read when we were kids. They always had ads on the back page for a guy called Charles Atlas, who was like the strongest man in the world or something.
Oh, yeah.
Selling his way of muscle building. I remember that very clearly. And everybody wanted to look like Charles Atlas. It was just one of those influences from your childhood. And it was still around when we were making those records. It seemed like an interesting subject for a song.
Sure. Yeah. The whole, I'm at the beach and the big jock is giving me a hard time and kicking sand in my face. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a weakling song. It's a song by a weakling who wanted to be Charles Atlas.
From a weakling's point of view.
Yes, a weakling's point of view, a weed. The weed crops up quite a lot in our songs, I think. We were just tapping into what was going on, same as you always do.
Sure.
If you think there's a song in something, you soon find out if you're right or wrong, and there was. But was this on the first album? It was, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Second song, first side, yeah.
Okay. Now, that album was put together very quickly. I think we'd had a one hit record by then, and it was like, we need an album out, boys.
So start writing.
Start writing and recording. So we were in the studio. Hang on one second. And it's interesting. It's something I've noticed that when we first began to write songs and make records, and I imagine this is true for many bands or many artists, that naturally you're drawn towards creating stuff that sounds like people you like because you don't know any better. You don't yet have a style of your own, or even know if you're capable of developing a style of your own.
Sure.
So you kind of, if you're into the Beatles, you try and write stuff that sounds a bit like the Beatles, and so on and so forth. And that's kind of what we were doing, I think, previous to that. Our previous band, Hot Legs, there was a lot of that going on because, we didn't really know any better. But let me finish. What actually happened was purely because we had so little time to put the first 10cc album together, there was no time to consider what we were doing. There was only time to do it. So we would think of something, write it and record it, without even thinking. And it was all 100% intuitive. Now, songs like Sand in My Face and Hospital Song, for instance, came out of that album purely because they were intuitive exercises. They were instinctive exercises, not exercises in trying to sound like great musicians or trying to sound like anybody else. Mm-hmm. We'd lost that, but found something else. We kind of found our own voice by not listening to anybody else's.
Sure. I can hear that. Absolutely. And I think that's true for a lot of people, is that, you kind of start emulating what you love, and out of that you find your own voice.
Yeah.
And I think the personal voice kind of develops naturally anyway, if you have the patience to let it happen. But
very much so. I remember when I first heard Elton John for the first time, I thought he sounded like Jose Feliciano. And not the songs necessarily, but the voice.
Yeah. Okay.
And then gradually it became Elton John.
Yeah.
I don't know, but that happens.
Oh, absolutely.
The only time, the only example I can think of where that hasn't been obvious is, Bob Dylan is a good example of that. When I first heard Bob Dylan, I'd never heard a voice like that before.
Yeah. What do they say? His voice sounded like sandpaper and glue.
I don't know what it said. Well, it didn't sound like anything. It was kind of abrasive for a while.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it wasn't. It just became a natural part of the landscape.
Sure.
Which was amazing. But everybody goes through that kind of process of it's almost like a physical process of their body discovering what you're all about, as opposed to your mind.
Sure.
And thought, the place of thought in creating music is overestimated.
Yeah, absolutely. We were talking about Rubber Bullets earlier. Was that inspired by any particular incident, or was that just kind of a story that was made up?
I think we were trying to write a song that sounded like a James Cagney movie.
Okay.
One of those sort of a jailbreak movie, and something like White Heat or something like that. But the phrase "rubber bullets" was knocking around at the time because of what was going on in Northern Ireland, mm-hmm. and it was just one of those things that sounded good.
Yeah.
And it's a crazy thing to write a song about, with the chorus about rubber bullets. It's not the natural kind of source material for a song, but it just works. It depends on what you're aiming to do. It just came out the way things sometimes do when you're writing material. It just came out, it worked, sat there, sounded right, sounded like it would record well. So you don't question these things.
No, just let it come through. Get out of the way.
Yeah, exactly.
How about Somewhere in Hollywood? I noticed you redid that a few years ago. Is that a favorite of yours?
One of my all-time favorites. That's probably a good example of a Godley and Creme song written by two people who wanted to make films, but at the time were incapable of doing so. And so we put that sensibility, if you like, coming from a visual background at art college and missing being able to do anything visual and wanting to make films, we put that into a song, that love of the glamour and the mystery of Hollywood. Sure. And the strangeness of Hollywood that way too. Instead of making a movie about it, we put the movie into a song.
Okay. Well, that's a great way to go about it. What inspired the remake?
The remake? What remake?
Well, I saw a video.
In the film?
Well, I saw a video of you singing this song maybe 5 years ago,
Yeah.
black and white. Was that part of a film?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not a remake. I'll tell you what it was. That Graham Gorman takes a touring version of 10cc out on the road.
Yeah.
And does very well at it. The music is still hugely popular. And he asked if I'd like to join him on a few gigs and sing that particular song.
Oh, okay.
And I wasn't into doing that, but I said what I would do instead, I would perform it on film. And I performed the vocal on film if there was a way of doing it where the band could back me while I was performing it on the screen. And that's really all it was. It was made for a stage performance by somebody who wasn't there, which was me.
I see.
Once I got into it, I figured I can make this look a little bit more interesting than just me standing there.
Yeah. Well, I bet that was a pleasant surprise for anyone that was at the concert. I'm sure they weren't expecting you to pop in like that. So that's an added bonus.
No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It worked well too.
Yeah. Is that your favorite album out of all the 10cc ones? I feel like I read someplace that the second one was a lot of the guys' favorites.
Yeah, sheet music, yeah. And I think it's because I think by the time we recorded the original soundtrack, we were quite musically sophisticated and we kind of knew who we were. And we ticked a lot of the boxes. But when we were recording sheet music, we were kind of 2/3 of the way there, so we didn't have the whole equation. And we were still searching for stuff. And to me, that's always the best time, where you can be great at something, but you haven't done everything you're going to do yet.
I agree. There's a lot of artists where it seems like the album right before they found their sound is often the most endearing and most interesting one. Almost like the process of kind of groping in the dark for something is more appealing than, oh, I found it and here it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's why. I mean, not every song is fantastic on sheet music, but there's just something about the spirit of that album. It was a 2 or 3 steps beyond the first album in many ways. But it just had a slightly naive quality, even though we were leaping ahead in many ways. There's just something about it. Something about it. I feel the same way about L, the second Godley and Creme album.
Great album.
There's just something. There's something about it that is like it's daring. It doesn't care. It doesn't give a damn what people think. This is just us trying to rediscover ourselves again.
Yeah. Well,
that's always those places where the lunatics are running the asylum still are always the best. Sure.
Did a record label wants come into the picture pretty soon after that, where you were they were pushing you guys? Was there ever like a record company kind of like going, we got to have another hit, please go this direction, or were you free to do whatever you wanted every record?
No, well it was when it did come along, it was self-inflicted.
Right.
And it was looking back on it, was kind of what created the backdrop for us ceasing to be. Mm-hmm. Because we were pretty successful by the time we made our 4th album. Yeah. Which I believe was...
How dare you?
What was it? How dare you? Yeah, but I remember. I may have got the chronology wrong. I think it may have been How Dare You, where we did something that we'd never done before recording. We had a pre-production meeting, which means we all kind of sat around and started talking about what kind of album this was going to be, what we should do for this album, what we should write, and what we should record for this album. But prior to then, it had always been, an album was always the result of what we managed to achieve in the studio over a given period of time, and that was it. There was no contrivance or calculation about what kind of tracks would come out of those sessions. It was just what had come out of those sessions. That was the album.
Sure.
Now it was, well, we need one of those songs. We need a long, complex Godley and Creme one. We need a couple of funny ones. It was like, it was starting to get to that point where we knew too much of who we were supposed to be, and what people expected of us. And it almost sounds a bit like we're a bunch of spoiled kids. But for myself and for Lord Cream, who thrived on not knowing and discovering, suddenly to know what we had to write, if we had to write something to a brief, then a big chunk of the enjoyment went out of it.
Sure, it seems premeditated. Okay, you want a funny one? I'm not in a funny mood, Or you want a long one? No, how about two short ones? So there was something about working that. The album was actually very good. It turned out very good in the end. But in terms of approaching it from that standpoint, it just didn't work for us. It was. I mean, I totally get it. I mean, you are in a sense, you've created a career, and finally, when you get to a place where you're very successful, obviously, logic would suggest that you want that to carry on. And so, from Eric and Graham's perspective, that's a natural thing to do. But we were strange beasts, and that's not what we really wanted to do. At the heart of it, it was we were prepared to run into brick walls. That's not really on the cards for a successful band. I could see that. Tell me a bit about Clockwork Creep. That's such an interesting subject to write a song about.
Well, it's no more or less interesting than the idea of writing a song about rubber bullets. It's one of those phrases that came out while we were trying to write something in that tempo. I'm a Clockwork Creep, and I can't get. Oh, that's interesting. What are we writing about? No idea. Let's carry on and see if something emerges, which it did eventually, from the perspective of a bomb, but in a funny way. It's almost like something Danny Kaye would have written, as opposed to a rock band, and that harks back to what were we really all about? Could the people who did I'm Not in Love write Clockwork Creep? And also Somewhere in Hollywood and One Night in Paris, yes. But they sound like they all come from different bands.
Yeah, but I like that variety personally, It's like, who wants a record that all sounds alike,
Lots of people.
Oh, I know.
Millions of them.
I don't.
Millions of them.
I know, but I don't. I scratch my head at that kind of, But then again, McDonald's sold 25 billion hamburgers, so there must be something to homogenation.
There must be, exactly. But that song it was one of those magical moments where something bizarre happened. For whatever reason, something interesting came out, and we followed it. It became that song.
Yeah, that's a great one. So tell us a bit about the inspiration for One Night in Paris. And is it true that it inspired Bohemian Rhapsody a year or two later?
I've been told that. I have no idea whether it's true or not. I've been told that. What inspired One Night in Paris, I would imagine, was Gene Kelly's film of An American in Paris.
Okay.
And Gershwin's music.
Sure, beautiful tune.
Those two, George Gershwin's An American in Paris, and the film that was made by Gene Kelly, starring Gene Kelly. Those two things, and we were big Gene Kelly fans at the time. And I've been told on a number of occasions, like by Graham, that the original piece was like one side of an album long, but I cannot, for the hell of it, recall it being that long. But that's where it came from. And we wrote that in France, as I recall. We were on holiday in France.
Did you write it in...
And we had a car. We wrote it in the south of France.
Did you write it in one night?
Are you kidding me? Days and days and days of agony.
I can imagine. How do you go about piecing together something that big and ambitious? Was it kind of like lining blocks up and trying different combinations?
No idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some of that, but the only time you know it works is if you remember it. If you remember that this change happens there and you can sing it, and you can recall the chord changes and you can do it day after day after day after day, then you know it works. If you can't remember it, forget it.
Sure. And back in those days, you know, nowadays you have so many aids to help you remember things, so many ways to record demos and rough versions. But back in those days, you just had to remember it, didn't you?
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. We were our own tape recorders. It just, I suppose that was an attempt, a self-inflicted experiment to see if we could better what we did with Somewhere in Hollywood, create something a bit longer, a bit more complex, and a bit more baffling than Somewhere in Hollywood. I think we got that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's quite a stunning piece of music.
The only thing that I regret about the recording was that sort of rather cod French accent everywhere. That really dates it.
Yeah. You wish you would have just skipped those in hindsight?
Yeah, we didn't need to do that shit. But we did, and it was, very much of its time. But as a piece of music, I think it stands up. Oh yeah,
quite well. Now, of course, that album also has the big hit "I'm Not in Love." I was wondering how has it aged for you, and how do you feel about it being the one song that everybody seems to know 10cc did?
Oh, I wish I'd written it for a start. I'm proud of my part in the creation of it. And it's funny, I was saying this to somebody else in another interview recently. In terms of the recording process, it's very rare that you go into a series of sessions on one song and every single thing that you try makes it better. But that particular track is a good example of that happening. Other than, of course, our first attempt to record it, which was a disaster. But when we finally found the key, everything that we added to it worked, which was quite something.
Yeah.
Now we recorded it initially. The early stages of recording that album was a rather cheesy lounge bossa nova song.
Okay.
Well, it wasn't even that, really. It was crap. But we always felt there was something in the song, so we just, we put it to one side and came back to it and discovered this new way of doing it out of desperation more than anything else. We got a song here that's good. How are we going to treat it? I remember suggesting that we do it all with vocals, masses and masses of vocals. And then we because we could, we found a way of doing it. I think that's Strawberry Studios was the fifth member of the band, because without that facility, without the capability of spending hours and hours on end trying things, I don't believe that we would have managed to do what we did at all.
Was this one where when you finally did the final mix, all of you had your hands on the faders and kind of performed it, so to speak?
Yeah, it was 1,000 Hands with Dr. Terwilliger, or whatever the movie was. It was the mixing desk became a keyboard, but instead of keys, there were faders.
Yeah.
And there were four of us playing it. It's pretty much what we did. Quite revolutionary in a way. But,
absolutely.
And I don't think there was something wonderful about the fact that we had to find ways to create noises, whereas today all you have to do is launch a plugin or twist a knob or dial up a pre-recorded sound. There's something remarkably existentially liberating and exciting about making the sound,
sure,
as opposed to dialing it up. You know, it's a different way of being.
Yeah, and your vocal, the vocal blend the four of you had was just so sublime. I was wondering if you ever remember a time when you first heard it and you all just kind of clicked and realized you had something really special there.
Yeah, it was when we were sat at the board pushing up the faders. We realized instinctively that there was something extraordinary about to happen. And we fell into that particular golden rabbit hole during knowing that. And there were great sessions, from that moment on. See, the original intent was to lose the guitar, the electric piano, and the kick drum, and to do it all in voices, but it became obvious pretty quickly that was going to hold everything else together, so we kept that. And indeed, we kept the original rough scratch vocal Eric did, because he couldn't better it.
So, what was the stain on the wall the picture covered up? Did somebody have a leaky roof and it was water damage, or what?
Don't ask me. I didn't write the song. I didn't write the lyrics.
Hard telling, yeah.
I have no idea. That's a good question. I don't know.
It's such a snide line, but such a classic one.
I know. It's a weird line. Maybe a bit of damp or something.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking moisture was an issue.
Dry rock.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. How about I'm Mandy? That's one of my favorites, and that's I would almost say that one's slightly progressive because it has the different sections that come and go, and the big pile of 12-string guitars and such. How did that one come together? Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, that was a good track. I love the.
Oh, that's such a
very Twilight Zone.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And the
who knows where this stuff comes from?
The 12-string bit reminded me a bit of it's what Genesis was doing early on. They had a few songs that kind of mined similar territory, but just coincidental.
Yeah. Again, it was just one of those things that we tried, and many other things they worked. And the fact that our working methods and our environment was such that it was up north, and a distance away from the centre of the record business. So very rarely did we have people visiting us from the label saying, "Well, you get another chorus in that, it'd be really good, and you can't say this." There was virtually none of that. There was none of that.
Well, that's good, because that kind of intervention never bears good fruit anyway, I don't think.
No, it doesn't, does it?
Not really. No, I mean, what does a record guy know about art? Not enough.
You would hope he would. He'd be on your side.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, some were more hip to it than others, I think. Some were more receptive. I think other ones would just have their mind on their wallets.
Yeah. Still, it's that line between art and commerce that makes it work, I guess. If it was just one or the other, we'd either all be very rich with no music or be very poor with lots of it.
That's a good way of looking at it. The Consequences album, how do you look back on that one all these years later? It was such an ambitious undertaking, and I'm just curious how you feel about it all these years later.
It was our Heaven's Gate, is how I feel about it. And Heaven's Gate is actually a very good film. It's just, at the time, for whatever reason, it just didn't fit. And I think that more than anything else is what happened with Consequences. We left the band full of all these grand ideas about what we wanted to do, and we jumped straight in, and off we went, and we got stir crazy to a degree. Meanwhile, outside in the real world, the polar opposite was kicking off. Tectonic plates were shifting.
Yeah, punk and such.
Was coming. The opposite, the total opposite of what we were trying to do. So the timing was wrong, the culture was wrong, everything was wrong, but some of the music was actually rather good in retrospect.
Oh yeah, I agree.
But there was no way at the time that anyone would dare to say so, because it would compromise their credibility in a big way.
Oh, yeah. Well, in hindsight, I think it's aged a lot better than some of those punk albums. So,
Well, it was a strange beast. It was a folly, is another way of describing it. It was a grand folly. And it does have a very kind of dedicated following of about 17 people. And I think there's a website devoted to it called Blimp's Attic. Whether that's still going or not, I don't know. But yeah, it's you have to have a folly.
Yeah.
In your creative life. Without a folly, you haven't got it out of your system.
Did you and Law feel like a couple kids in the candy store once you were free to just go do this?
Yeah.
You can almost kind of hear it in the grooves at times.
We had a great old time. It took about, 14 months, I think, to record one way or another in two different studios, and we had a whale of a time doing it with no thought about whether people would like it or not. In a sense, it was very self-indulgent, but in other ways, art has to be self-indulgent. You have to go the whole way, and we went the whole way. It just happened to be the opposite direction to everything else.
How much of a bearing did it have on the direction of the album that followed it, the L album?
Well, it was that came about for a number of reasons. I think the label were kind of so disappointed with the reaction to Consequences that the resources that we would have from that point on dwindled to a degree, and we couldn't spend that kind of money anymore on making records. So we had to find ourselves again. If we were interested in making more music, we weren't going to do Consequences again. We got that out of our system. So we decamped to a very small studio in Leatherhead, a place called Surrey Sound, which coincidentally the Police were working out. They recorded their first couple of albums there, I think. Okay. Produced by a wonderful gentleman called Nigel Gray, who owned the studio, who was in fact a police doctor. So we recorded there, 16-track. It was a great room, great control room. And Nigel had a fantastic set of ears, and he was producing us on the days he wasn't producing the Police.
Okay.
And L, Freeze Frame, those two albums, I think possibly the next one, were recorded at Sorry Sound relatively cheaply and relatively quickly, I think. And just with a whole sort of fresh approach. It was about sort of peeling everything back to basics. I'm kind of starting again, hence the title L, which was, I don't think you have them in America, but in England, when you're driving a car and you haven't got a license, you have to put L plates on your car.
Okay. Kind of like student driver.
That's what the album cover. That's what the album cover was. It was an L plate that says you're a learner.
Oh, I get it. Yeah, here it says caution student driver, stay back.
Yeah.
Like you never
That's
know
right.
what.
But in England, at least back then, at least back then, just a white square panel with a red L in the middle. Had everything you needed to know to beware of the car in front.
My friend Troy is a big fan of the song Sandwiches of You. Could you tell us a bit about how that came together?
We got into making loops and creating loops in the studio because I don't know, we enjoyed the studio process. We suddenly thought, let's come at this from a different perspective. Let's make loops. Let's do things with loops, so we don't have to keep things in time so much. And how can we make interesting loops? So I think Sandwiches of You was basically a crazy loop we put together. And as these things happen, you play the loop, you start playing along, you start singing, and out comes Sandwiches of You. Again, another bizarre phrase that comes from God knows where. So we turned it into a track. I don't know what else to tell you about it other than that. I can't remember what the logic of the lyric was, if there was any logic at all.
Yeah.
But there's certainly some interesting sounds and moments in that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. How about I Pity Inanimate Objects?
Yeah. I love that. That's one of my favourite tracks.
Oh, tell me more.
From the Godley and Creme canon. Okay, so sometimes when we were working, you would have an idea and then you would find the right piece of technology to commit the idea to tape. But sometimes you come across a piece of technology that inspires a piece of music, and in this case, that's what happened. Somebody delivered, as you do, or as we did in those days, people used to take new pieces of audio equipment round to studios so they could try them in the hope that they might actually purchase one. And so this piece of technology was delivered to Sorry Sound, which was a thing called a harmonizer.
Oh, yeah.
But along with it was also delivered a sort of one-octave keyboard. And we kind of sussed what the harmonizer was for, but we didn't quite understand what the keyboard was for. So we kind of figured out, okay, so how can we use this thing? Well, what if we recorded something? Well, let's do a loop. Let's make an interesting loop because we were in a loop mood. But if we wrote some lyrics and I recorded the vocal, but in a complete monotone, one note, and then we fed that vocal through the keyboard, could the vocal be played? Okay.
Right.
And the answer was yes. So what you're actually hearing is the vocal was originally I Pity Inanimate Objects because they cannot move. The whole song was sung in one note.
Right.
And that was then pushed through the keyboard. Or played the song, or played the vocal, if you like. We probably did, 3 different takes and sort of comped them together. And that was the track. It's an extraordinary exaggerated and rather extreme use of the technology that's used mostly these days to retune vocals so they sound like normal vocals
Right.
that are in tune. Now we took it in the opposite direction completely.
Oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
But again, it was just an exercise in discovering what this thing, because no one told us what it was supposed to do, so we just kind of tried stuff with it, discovered what it was capable of doing.
Yeah, and out of it came a great piece of music. So, yeah, you know, sometimes
Thank you.
something new.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I really like it as well. So you've seen these deep fake videos, I'm guessing. You know, it makes some of them make me think that the Cry video is kind of like the grandfather of all this. You know, the swapping of faces and morphing and all that. And I got to say that 30 years on or whatever, it's not any better. As a matter of fact, I think the Cry video is more successful than some of the kind of creepy, jagged stuff that I'm seeing nowadays.
Well, again, it was. I mean, the one thing that is interesting, because I redid that video, or that idea of the video for the UK band Elbow. They asked me to redo that video for them.
Awesome.
For a song of theirs, which I did. But the one thing I discovered in doing it was that, and again, it's an example of analog versus digital. Working in an edit suite these days is a totally digital experience, and if you want to do that kind of transition from one place to another, from one phase to another, it's a lot of tapping on a keyboard. Whereas originally, when we did it for Cry, we had these paddles on a mixing desk that you physically moved from one phase to another. Okay. So you are connected. You were physically connected to the material. What you were moving was making something happen on screen. That doesn't happen anymore. You are now 2 stages removed from creating the finished thing, which is fine. You know, but you lose something. It's part of the way things are now, in the same way that records that are made are mostly made not in studios in New York or in Detroit or in London or Manchester that have a particular sound. They're made in small rooms with pieces of digital equipment using sounds that already exist. So, which is partially why so many records sound the same. And this element of an audio imprint of a characteristic of a place seems to have disappeared.
Oh, that's a shame.
But you know what I mean? You know, Motown had a sound. There was a sound that came from Motown Studios. There was a sound that came out of Muscle Shoals Studios. There was a sound that came out of Abbey Road, and that was to do with the room. It was to do with the players. It was to do with everything, the environment. Right. That doesn't really exist anymore.
No, it's like everyone shares the
Something
same.
Else.
You know, everyone shares the same plugins.
Different drum samples, so you might get 15 artists using the same drum sample. You know.
Yeah.
Whereas that would never happen before.
Yeah, it's like the personality is just kind of drained out of it in a lot of ways, too.
Yeah.
You know, kind of a homogenous thing going on across the board.
Yes, to a degree. To a degree, yes. In other words, you can't go to a place and be guaranteed it's going to sound different from the off. You have to kind of create that in a very contrived way. It's not there in the wall. It's not in the building.
Yeah, and you know, I think that makes you have to work even harder to try and be original. You know, I think maybe some people would be better
Well,
off sampling their own sounds and going from there rather than
yeah.
using these ones that everybody uses.
Yeah. The thing is, for the artists that work like that, it's not a consideration because they're probably not aware that that even existed.
True. Yeah.
It's just people of our age that understand that something has got lost. It's been replaced by something else, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's just different.
Sure. You know, I mean, in some ways, you know, things are unlimited today. They're only limited by imagination. But I think in this day and age, people like convenience maybe a little too much. And, you know, it's easy to just click a song together with a mouse in 10 minutes, you know, but it's not necessarily going to be a particularly original creation in the process. But then again, who says it has to be?
Music itself is no longer as important as it was.
I know, and it kind of breaks my heart.
But it's, you know, it's progress. It's what happens. Things mean something and then they don't. It's just something we have to live with. There are so many more, so many interesting ways that people can entertain themselves now. There were no video games back then. You know, you couldn't, there was no Netflix back then, there was no Spotify back then, there was no, you know, back in the day there was no supermarkets, you know, there was very few things that meant as much as music did to my generation, because it was a way that my generation could express itself. But that's changed. It's no longer the only thing or the defining thing anymore. It's just one of many. And that's not necessarily something to be sad about. It's just that it's changed.
No, there's ways to be, you know, original and creative with any of those things. It's just a matter of having the imagination to do it. So, you know, so here's to imagination.
That's right.
Here's to imagination.
It is imagination, yes. Yeah, I might go along with that. When it comes down to it, it's the idea that counts.
Absolutely. Well, Kevin, I wanted to ask if there's anything you'd like to share with our audience before we wrap it up here today.
Well, we've already shared it. I was, you know, I was hoping we'd get to talk about conversations with myself and linguistic errors of judgment, which is due out on the 25th of this month, which we did.
Yeah.
I've nothing to plug. You know, I could talk about things that are on the horizon, like I've written a screenplay about the young Orson Welles, which I'm hoping to direct in the next couple of years. I'm getting closer to being involved with a new video games company, doing VR and AR kind of experiences. So there are many things that I'm still looking forward to doing, creative things. But I think, other than that, we've probably covered every second of my entire career in this conversation.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I know a lot of this you've gone over many times, but it's all fresh to my audience. So thank you for covering some well-tread ground. I'm sure that it's all fresh and inspiring today. So thank you.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it myself, and I'd love to chat again sometime down the road when you have something fresh you'd like to talk about.
You know how to get me.
Yeah, I do. I got your number.
You know how to reach me.
Alrighty then. Well, Kevin, take care. Have a great 2021. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. I will try. And yourself.
Alrighty. Thank you, Kevin.